Hey YouTube, Wes here checking in with a brand new episode of The Vinyl Survivor. This is the show where I share 10 albums with you from my recent listening stack and let you know what I thought of them, let you know whether they're going to be going back in my permanent collection or whether they just weren't for me, give you a bit of history and background on each one, tell you what I thought. So let's go ahead and get into it. This first album I have to share with you this evening is the debut album from the UK singer Julia Fordham from 1988, self-titled debut album here. It's
female pop singer. Yeah, so what did I think of this one? This is getting into the late 80s as far as pop rock, pop vocal kind of stuff. And it got sort of it got into sort of a zone where it was very much cool jazz, had a very much of a cool jazz kind of sound, which I just do not dig at all. So I really just didn't appreciate this album at all. It definitely sounds very, very dated, very 80s without being synthy. I like synthy 80s stuff, but stuff that's just very dated and 80s sounding that's not synthy is just not great to me. So I just didn't enjoy this, even though the lyrics, the songs are pretty good as far as their content, but just the overall music of this I just couldn't get into. There's a photo insert with some liner notes here, and it's on the Virgin label. So yeah, Julia Fordham, unfortunately not for me, just kind of a cool jazz 80s pop kind of sound to it, and did not enjoy this one. So that one is not going to be going in the collection. All right, the next thing I have to share with you is a compilation from the group The Doors from the 60s. This is their compilation called The Best of the Doors. I believe this was originally released in 73, and then this was remastered in 85, which is what this release is. This is a 2 LP gatefold set. Yeah, really cool. Just all the great Doors music on 2 LPs. Not much needs to be said about this. Really nice piece, and I'm glad to have it. And it's definitely going to be staying in my collection. I dig the Doors, and I do not have the entire discography, and so this is a nice piece for me to have. And when you want to put on the greatest hits of the Doors, there it is. So thumbs up on this one. It's staying in my collection. All right, next thing I have to share with you is a jazz fusion album from the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This is their first live album from 1973 titled Between Nothingness and Eternity. So yeah, just killer jazz fusion. Very, very heavy jazz fusion. Lots of very shredding kind of guitars on here. John McLaughlin. Jan Hammer and Billy Cobham is on here as well. Those are the most well recognizable artists on here from a really cool concert they did in Central Park. Yeah, really great stuff. If you're a rock guy and you want to get into jazz, I definitely suggest checking out fusion jazz, and something like this would be really good to get into. So yeah, definitely recommend this one, and it's not a difficult one to find. Yeah, really cool stuff. And it's on a Columbia red and orange label. All right, next up I have what I think is the 13th album by jazz pianist Ramsey Lewis with his album Back to the Roots from 1971. Yeah, very soul jazz kind of sound here. Pretty nice die cut cover as well, although quite delicate. And Ramsey Lewis is on the Cadet label. So that was nice label there. Okay, so yeah, Back to the Roots by Ramsey Lewis. I enjoyed this, but it's not really my thing. I'm not going to be keeping this, unfortunately. It's good if you're into jazz. You'll probably really dig this. And I'm kind of into jazz, but it's just not good enough for me to keep, if that makes any sense. It's a good album, and I recommend hearing it. But for me personally, it's just not a keeper, unfortunately. But it's a good album, and as I said, if you're into jazz, especially if you like more soul jazz kind of stuff, I think you'll definitely dig that one. All right, next up, moving back into the jazz fusion realm, we have the third album by John McLaughlin, his album titled Devotion from 1971. And of course, John McLaughlin was in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Again, he's a guitarist, a great guitarist. Can really play. If you're a rock guy, if you're a metal guy, you might get into this kind of stuff. If you want to get way into jazz, get some fusion jazz with a great guitarist like John McLaughlin in it, because they really shred. So yeah, this is really awesome. Definitely dug this one quite a bit. This one's got Buddy Miles, Larry Young, and Billy Rich as well in it. Cool funhouse sort of psychedelic mirror kind of inner gatefold there. Plain red inner sleeve. Haven't seen that one around before. This is on the Douglas Records label. John McLaughlin, Devotion. Definitely killer to me and definitely a keeper for me. I'm definitely more into the fusion jazz than the soul jazz kind of stuff. But yeah, I like bop kind of stuff too. So, you know, it's just there's many different paths you can go down with jazz, and so don't just pass it off just because you don't like one thing. But yeah, I'm definitely digging the fusion stuff, and John McLaughlin is one of the best. So definitely a keeper for me. All right, next up is the 1967 album by the Rolling Stones, their Satanic Majesty's Request. This is the Rolling Stones Go Psych, their one and only psychedelic record. They went right back to blues rock after this because that's what they do best. But this was a fun sort of journey down psychedelia for the Stones, and you know they were definitely under the influence here, and it gets fun and very psyche at times, and it's not. As a psych album, it's not great, but it's just cool to hear the Stones do it. And it, you know, if they had continued and tried to do another one, maybe it would have been too much. For this just one time that they did it, it's cool and it's fun, and I definitely dig it. This did produce the one hit, She's a Rainbow, on it. It's a well-known Stones track. This can be quite polarizing as far as Stones fans. People who are like the Stones because they're into blues rock probably don't like this. People who are more general fans enjoy this, and I definitely do. It has a cool lenticular cover on it, which is nice. And then the gatefold is more trippy, psychedelic kind of stuff. And then this is the insert, even though there's nothing printed on this. This is unique to this album, so that's definitely something you want to have with this. And this is on the London Records label. So yeah, Rolling Stones, their Satanic Majesty's Request. I definitely dig this. I enjoy it. I'm not a serious enough Rolling Stones fan to be a hater of this album. I think it's just fun and quirky and of the time, and I think it's cool that they did it. And I'm glad to have this in my collection, so it's staying around. All right, next up we're going to go back into the 80s with the synth pop group the Pet Shop Boys. This is their album from 1987 titled Actually. Not too much to look at on the cover here. Very, very sparse cover there, but very, very memorable, I guess. The back is pretty sparse as well. This album did produce two pretty big tracks for them. What Have I Done to Deserve This? And It's a Sin are both on this album. Good, solid album from them through and through. I enjoy listening to this all the way through. Really, the deep tracks on here are just as good as the hits, just as enjoyable. So yeah, really good, solid album if you're into synth pop. Insert another actual nicer photo there, and then track listings and a little bit of liner notes on there. And then this just has a white label on it. It's not a white label promo. It's just a white label on the Manhattan Records Company here in the States. That's how it came. So yeah, Pet Shop Boys. Actually, if you're a synth pop fan, this is something you should absolutely have. It's a classic album, and it's got some really big synth pop hits on it. So really good, and I definitely dig it. Okay, next up I have an album for you from this decade. First one from the 2000s here. This is actually an EP from the Australian artist Gordy, titled Clever Disguise, from 2016. Gordy is listed as folktronica. She's kind of the female version of Bon Iver, would be the best description of her. Yeah, really cool, really washy, electronic, folky kind of stuff. Definitely dig it. This is her EP on Jaguar. She did put out a full length a couple years ago, which I have as well. This was her first physical release. Just black vinyl on Jaguar. So yeah, it's Gordy's Clever Disguise. As I said, if you're into Bon Iver and you haven't heard her for some reason, give her a try. I think you might like her. I definitely dig her, and this is staying in my collection. All right, next up, moving on to some classic hard rock here. We have the second studio album by Def Leppard, titled High and Dry, from 1981, I think is when this, 1981 was the release of this. Definitely has their big hit, Bringing on the Heartbreak was the big hit on here. And I think High and Dry also was a minor hit, but Bringing on the Heartbreak is definitely the most recognizable track on here. I really dig this. I like later Def Leppard as well, but I like this early Def Leppard also. Sounds great. Definitely you can hear them sort of getting into their later period where they're getting into like a bigger, bolder sound. But yeah, really, really good stuff here. I love the artwork on this, the Hypnosis cover on here. This is a killer cover. I love the music, and not normally, I'm normally not the hard rock guy, but I like this album a lot. Even the deep tracks, the lesser known tracks on here are really good. And it's on the Mercury Records label. So yeah, that's Def Leppard's High and Dry. I really dig this a lot, and I definitely recommend it, and it's staying in my collection. All right, last but not least, going back into the 80s here, but we have an 80s soundtrack, and that is the soundtrack to Rocky IV. Classic 80s soundtrack, staying in that hard rock, hair metal kind of vein there. You got some really great tracks on here. You got Survivor's Eye of the Tiger, of course, probably the most well-known track on here, but it just got this whole soundtrack is loaded with some great synthy 80s hard rock kind of stuff. Yeah, really killer, and definitely a cool soundtrack, and a good one to put on when you want to get pumped up, or Saturday or Sunday afternoon kind of sound to get you going. Just a fun one to put on. And this one's on the Scotti Brothers label. And yeah, this soundtrack even has James Brown on it, so what more can you want? Fun soundtrack, and that's a great way to close this episode 161 of the Vinyl Survivor. Thank you all for watching. Hope you're all having a great day or a night whenever it is you're watching this. Remember, there is no bad music, only music you don't like. Have a great day, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.